Hello, everyone. Pastor George here on this beautiful Thursday, the 24th of April, in the year of our Lord, 2025. I know I'm wearing the same thing that I did yesterday. I assure you, it's not actually the same. When I worked at Walmart years ago, I bought like five of these. So I always had one in rotation because you had to wear like a Walmart colored shirt. And I still have most of them, I think. So if you happen to see me wear this 2 days in a row, doesn't mean that I'm wearing the same shirt. In any case, wanted to talk about Pope Francis today. As many of you know, he died on Easter Monday. Uh, I believe even in Italy. I know I knew about it Easter Monday at like 7 a.m. So yeah, I think that checks out. Like he probably died 2 a.m. our time, somewhere around there. Um, and so obviously this is a pretty interesting moment for the Catholic Church. But I'm sure you're wondering, okay, why does this matter for us? We're Protestants, and that's very fair, right? I mean, as something we're going to get into in this video, this is one of the benefits of not having such a central figure is some of the things we're going to talk about today, and the criticisms and the difficulties and stuff like that. But of course, like whether we like it or not, the Pope is probably the largest Christian voice, um, just by the fact that he is the head of a church of 1 billion people, right? Um, and so very much controls the media reaction to things, right? Even though, as we're going to talk about, how much control does he really have in this day and age is something that's kind of interesting. But I wanted to talk a little bit about his life, not so much his life, his papal stuff that he did while he was pope. Um, Maybe a little bit of legacy and kind of how we as Protestants should think about this. Maybe even as Presbyterians, if we want to get even deeper into that whole right. So, like always, though, I'm going to start us off with a Bible verse. We're going to be in Colossians today. Colossians 2, Colossians 4, verse 2 through 6. So, Paul is, this is kind of the end of his letter of the Colossians, and he tells them this. He says, "Continue steadfastly in prayer, being watchful in it with thanksgiving. At the same time, pray also for us that God may open to us a door for the word, to declare the mystery of Christ, on account of which I am in prison, that I may make it clear which is how I ought to speak. Walk in wisdom towards outsiders, making the best use of time. Let your speech always be gracious, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how you ought to answer each person." So I really like this, and I actually think that this text, I mean, of course I like it, right? It's the Bible. I think this text does a really good job at pointing out maybe what I believe that Francis was good at, and also what he struggled with. And is he unique in this? No, of course not, right? Many of us struggle with this. Um, but first things first, like I just want to talk about some of the reactions, the polarization that happened, right? Like, so I'm sure that if you've followed the news at all over the past, 10 whatever years, he came in when I was in college. So I want to say he was 2013, 2012, maybe. I can't remember when he became pope, but I want to say it was one of those years. It was the early 2010s, right? So he's had a fairly long papacy, but of course not as long as someone like John Paul II or something like that, right? Um, so Francis is an interesting guy. I just want to say that like his name, I've talked about this in our church history class downstairs, but he took the name Francis after Francis of Assisi, one of the medieval reformers that I mentioned in my last class, right? Guy who is really interested in living a life of poverty, like Jesus and his disciples, right? Purposeful poverty, um, surviving off of begging and things like that, right? Started the Franciscan movement, and Pope Francis chose him to be his name, the very first one, and to take that name. And he very much made that a big deal, right? And I think like early on, and I think this is something that we should actually be pretty I think is a good thing, right? Is like he didn't live in the papal palace apartments or whatever. He lived in another smaller, more, less ostentatious one. He also didn't wear really ostentatious robes. He chose to wear instead, kind of more simple vestments and things like that. Um, he also apparently, I don't know this for sure, but I feel like I read this, is that he doesn't want to be buried in like a very fancy tomb, right? He just wants kind of a simple one. And I think that that's true to who he is and what his mission for the church was, right? He was very concerned with Catholic social teaching on all sorts of stuff, and kind of the stereotype with him and his predecessor Benedict, right? Benedict is kind of seen as this arch conservative, and like popularly, and Francis is kind of seen as the opposite of that, right? Being very progressive and liberal, or however you want to phrase it, right? Also, that Benedict is like the thinker, and Francis is more the feeler. And I'm not an expert in that. I do know that Benedict was very a lot more academic, but I just want to point out that this is these are published by popes. They're called encyclicals. They're meant to be these letters that are kind of sent out to the whole church, or statements that are sent out to the whole church. And like, you can read this. This is his most recent one. It's Dilixit Nos. He loved us in Latin, right? From I imagine, right? From yeah, he cites it here. 1 John 4:10. He loved us first. Um, and it's basically on the importance of devotion to the heart of Jesus Christ, which is one of those Catholic devotions. If you ever go in the store, you see the little candles, right? And Jesus is like opening up his chest like this, and there's a little heart with that, with the crown of thorns around it. It's bleeding or whatever. That's the heart of Jesus, and it's a devotional type of thinking where it's like, okay, meditating on the type of heart that Jesus had and things like that, right? Of course, it can, as many Catholic things can get, pretty zany, but I think the heart of it is thinking about Jesus' love for the world as good, and that's really what this is about. You could read this. You won't. I'm saying I'll put it in the description. You probably won't. It's huge. Like, look at this. I'm scrolling down, and now look at it. He's like footnoted it. So could you imagine, like, if this was a letter that I sent out, and he's like quoting the Iliad and stuff like that, and so like, not that he's not a scholar, right? So he's a thinker as well. You have to be, if you're the Pope, right? I mean, a lot of us don't understand that process, but you really have to be a pretty uh, studied figure to get to this level. Um, and I read this, and obviously there are things that I kind of would push back against, but overall, like, I find it good, right? But the idea here, generally presented, is that he focuses on social issues and things like that, and doesn't really care about doctrine as much, and like, that certainly has kind of been his popular reception. And I think that's probably due to the media, who latch on to any kind of progressive statement that he would make, and this has caused kind of a backfiring on a lot of levels. So, like, for instance, when he died, someone sent this to me, right? This is from Laura Loomer, who's kind of this way off, in my opinion, way off the rails, kind of more conservative person, right? And you can see here, this is a Vatican, and you have the smokestack. So just in case you don't know, when the Pope is chosen, they're going through the conclave. They're burning paper, and they burn like the notes that they vote on. And I want to say, if it's black smoke, nothing has been decided yet, and if it's white smoke, it means a pope has been chosen. But anyway, you can see here is the pride colors, the rainbow pride colors coming out the top. And she posted this. See, April 21st to Monday. So when he died, right? She posted this after he died. Tasteful, very good, very tasteful. I mean, he's still. I think, like, we can also see this in other conservative kind of thinkers. It should be noted that, as far as I understand it, Laura Loomer and definitely Ben Shapiro are not Catholic, but I think this is helpful because it's how he's been perceived by the outside world. So, like, for instance, Ben Shapiro said here, this was, yesterday. I'm hoping that the next pope provides more moral clarity with regard to the things that matter. And then he also said, where else? Yeah, right here. He says the Catholic Church has been failing in recent decades, not just because of the assault of secularism, but because it has been imbibing from the well of modernity and casting out its own spiritual values. Now, I actually don't really fault Ben or Laura for this, because this is like partly a reactionary thing to the things the media has promoted about Pope Francis, which, if you pay attention, it's very much more like highlighting his progressive uh, mentions and things like that. No, not all the time, right? Like I remember like a few months ago, he used to slur, and they talked about that quite a bit. I don't think he did it purposely, to his credit, because Italian is like his third language or something like that. He speaks like a million languages, of course, and it's his third. And I think he used an outdated word for a gay person, and people really latched onto that in both comedic and non-comedic ways. But I bring this up because this is kind of like the public facing thing, and I think a very surface level reading, right? Like if you read Dixit Notes, you're gonna find out that it is very, very traditional in the way that it sees things. And so I want to really kind of balance this, because it gets me to this point, and why I think is a big part of. And I think that this is actually, it is this type of stuff charitable? Not at all, right? It's not reading the Pope in the most charitable light. But I also think he left himself open to this, and this is why I really want to focus on these verses and importance of Christians and Christian leaders, that when we speak publicly, we're clear about what is the truth. And I understand that that's hard, right? Like someone texted me earlier this week, and they're like, "So what do you think of Pope Francis?" Da 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 da, all that other type of stuff, right? And I wrote some like criticisms that I had or whatever, and positive things too. But then at the end I was like, listen, I'm also not the head of a church with 1 billion people in it, and I think we do need to have some charity there. At the same time, I think the critique is, was he speaking clearly all the time? And I don't think so. And now some of that might be translation issues. Some of that might be his pastoral heart, which he has, and really all pastors should have. Um, and the balance that comes from being able to speak clearly, but also having a pastoral heart for people, is really difficult. If you've ever been in a situation where you're counseling someone, you know that can be the case, especially if it's someone you're close to or have sympathy for. It's even harder, right? If it's not someone you have sympathy for, it's very easy to speak clearly. That's what I've found the case. Um, but here, right, Paul is asking that he is able to speak clearly, and that his words be gracious and seasoned with salt. Or he prays this for the Colossians, actually, right? But I think those two things go back to back. And so I want to give two examples of this. So like people made a big deal about this when it happened, right? He met with a group of left political leaders, and he said Marxists and Christians have a common mission. Now, if you read that by itself, that's pretty crazy, right? I mean, like from a historical perspective, I'm, even if I might think that Marxists have some good critiques of society, I would never really push for a Marxist direction, because if you read Marx, if you read communist thinkers, right, they have very negative things to say about religion generally, and you can see how those states have treated our brothers and sisters in Christ. And so I think we should be very wary of associating with this type of stuff. But right, he's trying to have a dialogue with these people, and I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, right? They also need Jesus. We also need to talk to them, and to what he's going to point out here, is an actually important. Maybe there are important things that Christians and Marxists can work alongside of it. How close we want that relationship to be is kind of important, right? And maybe we should be, wise in our dealings here. But he was really big on like incarnational ministry, being there in person, chatting with people, and doing a lot of things off mic, or off script, I should say, but on mic. So anyway, he had them over, right? And like, I just want to say, look at the thing that the first quote from him that is highlighted. Here is a better fraternal future. So this is a big thing for him. Is that like the brotherhood of mankind? Okay, right, very generic kind of thing to say. And the next thing he says is, do not allow finance and the market to dictate the law. And I would actually challenge, like, does anyone, would anyone really challenge this idea, right? I mean, like, I'm sure maybe some people would say, well, what does this mean? Or maybe push back against some of that, right? But I think most of us, when we see something like this, would say, yeah, we shouldn't allow the finances or the market to dictate the law, right? The law should be above those things. And certainly he's having a critique of like international finance and the fact that, certain economic systems are in place and that hold people down. And I think we should just admit that that's not a bad thing, right? Um, but at the same time, like I think this had the pastoral heart, but it lacked clarity, right? Because it's like, okay, yes, this is a dialogue, but also when can this go too far? Because really what happens is it just switches gears. And I would say that in the Marxist system, sure, the market and finances do not dictate the law, but Marxist theory does, or this endless race for purity of morality, a purity of a system where of justice or something like that does, and it ends up creating a very not just society. So I think that it's there are things that probably he overspoke on here, right? But so you read things like this, and it's very easy to just to do this, right? And this is certainly what people will focus on. Ben would focus on this, or his statements about the environment. He posted an encyclical. White people will say, "Oh, that doesn't matter. The environment doesn't matter." I mean, my whole point with stuff like this, where it's like provides moral clarity with regard to things that matter. I mean, from a Christian perspective, sin is everywhere, and so everything matters, right? I think uh, this is one of the big differences between Ben is an Orthodox Jew. One of the big differences between Judaism and Christianity is that we see sin as a very pervasive problem in the world, and so everything has been touched by it. So yes, like economic stuff matters, right? Environmental stuff matters, sexual stuff matters, right? That's usually so. The more progressive people really like the critiques that Pope Francis had to offer of environmental um, and uh, and social justice or economic justice, whatever you want to call it, issues. Now, this is where we pivot and we turn to this whole idea where like this is kind of funny to me because I actually bet that Pope Francis is more conservative about marriage than Laura Loomer is, and I'll show you how. All right, so this is from Deseret News. It's a political, not political. It's a news outlet out of Utah, right? So it's a neutral. I think it's a very neutral source. It's not a Catholic source. It's not like a very progressive source. I think it's like very much in the middle. Um, so this happened a little while ago when Pope Francis said he uh, he's open to the possibility of priests blessing same-sex unions. We're going to talk about that. Hold on, because I know as soon as you see that, you go, okay, this, right? Hold on. Um, this is where his pastoral heart comes into play, and you can see this. Part of the reason I chose this article is because they pull from a lot of different sources to provide, I think, a helpful narrative. So good job, Kelsey Dallas. Um, he says we cannot be judges who only deny, push back, and exclude. Right. So he's talking about the heart here. As such, pastoral prudence must adequately discern whether there are forms of blessing requested by one of several people or several people that do not convey a wrong idea of matrimony, because when one seeks a blessing, one is requesting help from God. Right. So his idea of when this happened wasn't that we should bless same-sex unions for the purpose of blessing same-sex unions. It was mostly like, how do we care for these people spiritually in this moment? Do we just completely shut them out, or do we have something to offer them, right? Um, and so, but of course, people latched on to this part right here, and you get this. Okay, now let's go down a little bit. Um, uh, uh, this is they're talking about the fight between, because the German church is actually very pro um, moving in a direction to actually just market black, like, blank check, bless all same-sex unions, right? And Pope Francis is actually kind of fighting against that. Um, here, right, he says, while homosexuality should not be criminalized, it remains sinful in the eyes of the church. So, it's not a crime, yes, but it's a sin. Already, let's be real, this puts him in a minority of people in the United States who believe that that homosexuality is a sin, right? Or at least that's sex between same-sex people is a sin, right? I mean, already, like, that's a very conservative stance in the United States, okay? He's had a welcoming attitude, right? I think that this is kind of the really tough part, and where we see this, because he does speak with clarity in a lot of places, like here, right? He's speaking with clarity, but he also troubles it sometimes by these pastoral moments that he has, right? It makes it very difficult. I think that that's kind of the toughest part of his papacy, was like, what do we make of that, right? But here's where he has the very conservative and traditional Catholic opinion on marriage. He says marriage is an exclusive, stable, and indissoluble union between a man and a woman, naturally open to conceiving children. Okay. So right here, I would bet that he has a stronger, or I would say a more conservative or kind of rigid view of marriage than pretty much everyone in our church, than myself. And I'm by no means, if you know me, an insanely progressive person, right? Especially on cultural issues, and Laura Loomer and Ben Shapiro. So exclusive, right? So one man and one woman, indissoluble. Remember, Catholic social teaching doesn't believe in divorce. So it's indissoluble, right? So when you get divorced in the eyes of the church, it's annulled, to say as though your marriage never even happened. And it's a big process, right? Most Catholic couples don't even go through it because it's so much work to actually do it, right? So divorce shouldn't be allowed. It's exclusive, it's stable, man and woman, and naturally open to conceiving children. This is the other part, right? You have to have kids. That's not an option in Catholic teaching, right? If you have a marriage and you just choose not to have kids, that's not okay, right? That is, wrong. The purpose of marriage in Catholic teaching is, of course, yes, love between husband and wife, yes, an outlet for sex, right? But mainly to have children. And he doesn't change it. He kept that firm the entire time he was in the papacy, right? Here are times where he could have lessened that, and he didn't, right? And he said the church avoids all kinds of rites or sacramentals that could contradict this conviction and imply that it is recognizing as a marriage something that it is not. So, right here, right, I know that Orthodox Jews believe in divorce for Ben, right? And I have no idea what Laura Loomer believes, but I imagine that she doesn't have as strict an opinion about this as Pope Francis does. So a lot of clarity here. And, like, as Protestants, I think we can disagree with this, right? I think that Catholic teaching about marriage is wrong in the sense that it requires to have children, because I think it wrongly interprets the meaning of Jesus' statements in the Gospels, and the importance of family, or the lessening importance of family in the New Testament as the highest good or whatever. And so I want to bring it back to this part here, right? Bring it back to Colossians. I think Pope Francis struggled with this tension. He wanted to be pastoral to people. He wanted to show them love. But at the same time, I think that meant for him that he couldn't be clear when he needed to be. And the problem is when you're a public figure and public facing, you have to be very clear about your statements. Um, and that has caused like all sorts of rifts. But now, and this is like the classic Protestant critique, is that I can read Dilixit Nos and I can say, there's a lot of good stuff in here. There's some stuff I disagree with. But, have a conversation, whatever. At the end of the day, this isn't binding on me. And this is where the ultimate kind of, as we'll get into our Reformation unit, the big split comes, right? Because if you're a Catholic, you can read the comments in here and you'll see like this guy's calling him a communist, right? I mean, that's ridiculous. But you can read comments. You'll see all sorts of Catholics trying to, be like, oh, well, it's like, that's not an option when you're a Catholic, right? You actually have to care about what the Pope says because he's the head of the church and the vicar of Christ, right? He's Christ's representative on earth. And so what he says goes, right? Any moment, the Pope in Rome could make an ex cathedra statement and make something doctrine that you then have to abide by. And this has been the Protestant critique of this since, or a Reformed critique, even before Martin Luther. This Reformation critique, you see this goes all the way back into the Middle Ages of the power that the Pope was beginning to have, right? The problem is that people want the Pope to, because they're modern people, influenced by politics and stuff, democratic things, they want the Pope to reflect their values. And that makes it really hard when you have an authoritarian system kind of baked into the cake, right? So I was reading some of these comments, right, that people would leave on these, and it was very interesting to me because, they were like, the Pope should stay out of politics. And it's like, as someone who's into history, the Pope has been involved in politics for over a millennia, right? Like 1,500 years. So now you want to decide that they shouldn't be in politics because he disagrees with you on global warming or whatever. Come over here. The water's warm in the Protestant section if you're worried about that type of stuff. We can sort through that stuff together. You can disagree with your pastor on politics and still worship together and not have to worry about the stances of the church as much because it's made of fallible human beings, right? And so I think that, from here, so what should we as Protestants think about this? Of course, like, ultimately, it doesn't really affect us in a day-to-day life because we don't have to deal with the teachings of whatever comes. If it's very conservative next pope or very progressive next pope, right? We don't have to really worry at the end of the day. We can kind of just comment and agree when we think it's good and disagree when we think it's bad. That's a very freeing feeling, and I think that's a good thing. But I also think we should pray for the church, and by the church I mean not only the universal church, that we come to more unity, and that we're able to stand together against a lot of these forces that Francis warned about, but also things that are just happening in the world. I think it's very important for us to stand together against that. At the same time, I think we should pray for the Catholic Church and pray that they elect a pope who is open to reform, biblical reform. Because oftentimes we can just think that we left and therefore it doesn't matter anymore, but we really should care about them and have the hope of the reformers, right? The reformers never wanted to form a new church. They all were priests or thinkers that came out of the Latin Church, and it divided into the Protestants and into the Catholic, the Roman Catholic Church. And so I think we should really hold out hope that the Pope does reform, right? We shouldn't see if a Pope comes in and he says, actually, priests should get married now, right? There's going to be a lot of hand-wringing in traditional circles, but I think even if you're a conservative person in the United States, you should say, yeah, that's a good thing because that's the biblical thing, right? Leaders in the church should be able to get married. I can give a whole history about the celibacy thing. It started as a reform movement, right? But it's ended up kind of, I think, running its course, and that we should allow, because the Bible allows it, priests to get married. But of course, if someone were to come in and do that, they'd be labeled as most likely by a lot of people as a progressive, as like a Marxist or whatever. And we need to avoid using our political terminology to talk about a biblical doctrine and reforming to and from something, right? It doesn't matter if the Pope um, makes everything go back to Latin. That isn't a win, right? I love Latin. Okay, I love it. I have my textbooks up there. I love Latin. Okay, but if they're forcing people to learn and do things in Latin, that's not a good thing. That's a negative reform, right? That's not a positive one. So we need to really pray that whoever is selected is a pope that is open to unity and reform, and brings the church closer together. Because our ultimate goal should be to have some sort of unity with each other, if not institutional unity, then certainly theological unity. So we're able to be a united front, to be able to speak with clarity and compassion in our various different traditions to a world that's really changing and doesn't know where to find itself now. So that's all I wanted to talk about. Hope you guys found that interesting. Any questions, whatever, talk to me about it. I will see you guys on Sunday for worship, and next week we're going to have our Bible studies and our new thing as per usual. So I will see you then. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your Thursday. Peace out.